In 1975, a single piece of paper nearly ended one of country music's most beloved groups forever. The Statler Brothers were selling out shows across America, riding high with hit after hit. But backstage, away from the spotlights and standing ovations, four friends who had sung together since high school were facing the hardest decision of their lives: stay together and risk everything, or walk away from it all. Don Harold Reed, Phil Balsley, Lou DeWitt, and Harold Reed had spent over a decade building their dream. From singing in local churches in Staunton, Virginia, to backing Johnny Cash on world tours, the Statler Brothers had become country music's premier vocal group. Their unique blend of gospel harmonies and country storytelling had earned them Grammy Awards, gold records, and countless fans across America. But success in the music industry often comes with hidden costs. While other groups were falling apart due to ego clashes or substance abuse, the Statler Brothers faced a different kind of threat, one buried in the fine print of a contract they'd signed years earlier, before anyone could have predicted their meteoric rise. In the spring of 1975, as the group was preparing for their biggest tour yet, their lawyer made a discovery that would shake them to their core. What he found in that contract would force four best friends to question everything they'd built together, and put their brotherhood to the ultimate test. To understand how the Statler Brothers found themselves at this crossroads, we need to go back to where it all began. In a small Virginia town, where four young men with big dreams first discovered the power of harmony. The story of the Statler Brothers begins in the Shenandoah Valley, where the sounds of gospel music echoed through church halls every Sunday. In the late 1950s, Staunton, Virginia was like any other small southern town. Everyone knew each other, and music was the heartbeat of the community. Don Reed and his older brother Harold grew up singing in those churches, their voices naturally blending in the way that only siblings can. Phil Balsley and Lou DeWitt were local boys too, classmates who shared the Reed brothers' passion for harmony. The four teenagers would spend countless hours practicing in Harold's '55 Chevy, parked outside the local grocery store where they all worked. They called themselves the Kingsmen then, not knowing that their chosen name would later force them to make a change. But it wasn't their harmonies alone that set them apart. While other groups were content to simply sing, the Statler Brothers were crafting a unique sound that blended gospel quartet harmonies with country storytelling and a dash of humor. They played every venue that would have them: church socials, county fairs, high school gymnasiums, honing their craft and building a loyal local following. Then came the moment that would change everything. In 1963, Johnny Cash heard them perform at a local show. Cash, already a country music legend, recognized something special in the young quartet. Within days, he offered them a spot on his tour. It was the break they'd been dreaming of, but it also meant leaving their comfortable lives in Staunton behind. The next 8 years with Johnny Cash were a whirlwind of success. Their first major hit, Flowers on the Wall, earned them a Grammy Award and established them as stars in their own right. The song's unique blend of clever wordplay and tight harmonies became their signature sound. More hits followed: Bed of Roses, Class of '57, and Do You Remember These? Each one showcasing their ability to tap into America's collective nostalgia. By 1972, they had outgrown their role as Cash's opening act. They were headlining their own shows, appearing regularly on the Grand Ole Opry, and winning industry awards. The four friends from Virginia had become country music royalty. Every record they released seemed to turn to gold, and their tours were selling out across the country. The group had even survived their first major challenge, having to change their name from the Kingsmen when another group claimed legal ownership of the title. They chose the Statler Brothers after spotting a box of Statler tissues in their hotel room, a decision that would become part of country music legend. Their ability to handle this early setback as a unified front seemed to prove that nothing could break their bond. But success in the music industry often comes with fine print. As the Statler Brothers were riding high on their achievements, none of them realized that a contract signed during those early days with Johnny Cash was about to surface and threaten everything they had built together. Spring 1975 started like any other season for the Statler Brothers. They were preparing for their biggest tour yet, riding the success of their latest album, Sons of the Motherland. The group had recently moved their business operations back to their hometown of Staunton, wanting to keep their roots firmly planted in Virginia soil despite their national success. It was during this routine review of their business affairs that their lawyer made the devastating discovery. Buried in their original recording contract from 1963 was a clause that gave their record company unprecedented control over their music, image, and future earnings. The contract, signed during their early days with Johnny Cash when they were young and inexperienced, essentially made them employees rather than artists. The record company could dictate everything from their song choices to their performance schedule, and even claim ownership of their distinctive four-part harmony style. Don Reed, the group's lead singer, later recalled the moment they learned about the clause. "We were sitting in our office thinking about the future when suddenly we realized we might not have one. The contract's terms meant that even if they left their current label, they couldn't perform or record their signature songs, the very music that had made them famous. The timing couldn't have been worse. The group had just invested heavily in building their own recording studio in Staunton. They had families to support, employees who depended on them, and a touring schedule that stretched months into the future. The discovery of this contract clause put everything at risk. Most alarming was the realization that the record company could potentially prevent them from performing together at all if they tried to challenge the agreement. The Statler brothers weren't just facing a financial crisis. They were facing the possibility of being legally forced to disband the group they had spent 15 years building. The contract's fine print was a masterclass in corporate control. It bound them not just as recording artists, but as performers, songwriters, and even as business partners. Any attempt to break free could trigger clauses that would strip them of their right to perform together under any name. The document even claimed ownership of their arrangements and vocal style, essentially attempting to copyright the very way they sang together. Their lawyer explained that similar clauses had been used to destroy other groups who had tried to challenge their record companies. The industry was littered with the remains of once successful acts who had disappeared after attempting to break free from restrictive contracts. The Statler brothers were about to enter a battle that few artists had ever won. As word of their contract crisis began to spread through Nashville's music community, the Statler brothers found themselves at the center of a battle that would test not only their friendship, but the entire structure of the music industry. What happened next would change the way artists and record labels did business forever. The Statler brothers had always handled their challenges as a unified front, but this battle would require more than just solidarity. They assembled a team of the best entertainment lawyers in Nashville and began plotting their strategy. The record company, sensing their intentions, made the first move, a stern warning that any attempt to challenge the contract would result in immediate legal action. The music industry watched closely. In 1975, record companies held almost unlimited power over their artists. Few performers had successfully challenged these restrictive contracts and survived. Johnny Cash, hearing about his former protege's troubles, offered public support, but even his influence couldn't shield them from the brewing storm. The group's first counter-move was bold. Their lawyers discovered that the original contract might be vulnerable due to the circumstances under which it was signed. The Statler brothers had been barely out of their teens, with no legal representation present. More importantly, they found evidence that certain promises made during the signing had never been fulfilled. But the record company wasn't backing down. They threatened to freeze all royalty payments, money the group desperately needed to maintain their touring schedule and support their families. They also began pressuring radio stations to reduce airplay of Statler Brothers songs, a common tactic used to remind artists who really controlled their careers. The battle quickly escalated beyond just legal proceedings. Music industry executives began spreading rumors about the group's stability. Booking agents were warned about scheduling their shows. Even their longtime musicians and crew members were approached with offers to jump ship to other acts. The pressure was mounting from all sides. Through it all, the four members stayed remarkably united. They had grown up together, built their careers together, and now they would fight together. Harold Reed, known for his humor on stage, showed a different side during this period, becoming the group's rock. "We decided early on," he later said, "that we'd rather go down swinging than live under those terms." The group's fans, sensing something was wrong, rallied behind them. Letters of support poured in from across the country. Local radio stations in Virginia defied the pressure and kept playing their music. Fellow artists, many facing similar contract issues themselves, began speaking out about industry practices. What had started as one group's legal battle was becoming a movement for artists' rights. The turning point came when several major newspaper outlets picked up the story. The public exposure of the contract's terms sparked outrage and debate about artist rights. The record company, accustomed to handling these battles in private, suddenly found themselves facing public scrutiny and criticism. While the public battle played out in courtrooms and industry boardrooms, behind the scenes, the Statler brothers were facing an even more difficult struggle. The strain of fighting for their professional survival was taking a heavy personal toll on four friends who had never imagined their success could become their biggest threat. While the Statler brothers maintained a united public front, privately each member was wrestling with his own demons. The stress of the legal battle began seeping into every aspect of their lives. Don Reed, usually the group's steady voice of reason, found himself lying awake at night wondering if he'd led his friends down a path of destruction. His brother Harold, despite his outward strength, was taking antacids by the handful as the pressure mounted. Lou DeWitt, already dealing with the early symptoms of Crohn's disease that would later force him to leave the group, felt the added stress affecting his health. Phil Balsley, the quietest member of the quartet, worried about providing for his young family. They had all taken out second mortgages on their homes to help fund the legal battle, and their savings were rapidly depleting. The strain showed up in unexpected ways. During rehearsals, the perfect harmony that had always come so naturally began requiring more takes. Their usual playful banter backstage became forced. Even their weekly prayer meetings, a tradition since their church singing days, grew tense as they struggled to maintain their faith in the face of mounting obstacles. Their families bore the burden too. Wives became part-time secretaries, handling phone calls from lawyers and press. Children couldn't understand why their fathers were home more, but seemed more distant than ever. The group's office in Staunton, usually a hub of activity and laughter, took on the atmosphere of a war room, with legal papers covering every surface. The lowest point came when they had to cancel several tour dates, something they'd never done before. Their road crew, many of whom had been with them for years, had to be temporarily laid off. The decision hit hard. These weren't just employees. They were extended family. Don Reed later wrote in his journal, "Today we had to tell good men they're out of work because we decided to fight. The right thing has never felt so wrong." Yet somehow the crisis brought them closer. Late-night strategy sessions turned into opportunities to remind each other why they'd started singing together in the first place. They began ending their meetings the way they'd always ended their shows, with a gospel song. The harmony might have been shakier, but the meaning ran deeper than ever. The pressure began affecting their creative process too. Songs they'd written during this period took on a darker tone, reflecting their struggles. One unreleased track from these sessions, found years later in their archives, included the telling line, "When brothers stand together, no contract can tear them apart." It was never recorded, but became something of a private anthem during their darkest days. As the legal battles dragged on through 1975, the Statler brothers were about to discover that sometimes the darkest hour really does come just before dawn. The resolution, when it finally came, would arrive from the most unexpected source. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source, a junior lawyer who had been reviewing decades of the record company's contracts. He discovered that similar clauses had been ruled unenforceable in a little-known California court case from 1969. It wasn't a perfect match, but it provided the leverage the Statler brothers desperately needed. Armed with this new information, their legal team approached the record company with a bold proposal. They wouldn't just challenge the contract in court, they would make public every questionable clause, every broken promise, and every attempt at intimidation. In an industry built on private dealings, the threat of transparency was powerful. The record company executives, already facing growing public criticism, began to waver. The Statler brothers' stance had inspired other artists to examine their own contracts. Industry publications were running editorials about predatory practices. The last thing the company needed was a high-profile court battle with one of country music's most beloved groups. In November 1975, after months of negotiations, both sides reached an agreement. The Statler brothers would remain with the label, but under a completely new contract, one that would become a model for artist rights in the industry. They won back control of their music, their performances, and most importantly, their future. The victory came with a price. The months of legal battles had drained their resources, and they lost valuable touring time. But they had won something more valuable than money: their freedom. The new contract included unprecedented provisions for artistic control and fair compensation, terms that would later become standard in the industry. Johnny Cash was among the first to congratulate them, saying their stand had opened doors for every artist in Nashville. Other performers began demanding similar contract revisions. The music industry's balance of power had shifted, even if slightly, toward the artists. The group celebrated by doing what they did best: performing. Their first concert after the settlement was in their hometown of Staunton, where they received a standing ovation before singing a single note. The performance that night, particularly their gospel numbers, carried an emotional weight that moved many in the audience to tears. As Don Reed later recalled, "We weren't just singing about freedom that night, we were living it." The Statler brothers had won their battle, but the impact of their fight would echo through country music for decades to come. Their stand against industry giants would inspire and protect generations of artists who followed in their footsteps. The Statler brothers' contract battle of 1975 did more than save one group's career. It fundamentally changed the relationship between artists and record companies in country music. Their new contract became a template for other performers, establishing precedents for creative control, fair compensation, and transparent business practices that continue to protect artists today. In the years following their victory, the Statler brothers reached new heights of success. They launched their own television show on TNN, won multiple CMA awards, and were inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame. But perhaps their greatest legacy was the path they cleared for other artists to maintain control of their careers. The group's stand against industry exploitation inspired a wave of contract reforms throughout Nashville. Young artists entering the business now had better protection, and established performers gained leverage to renegotiate their own deals. The practice of binding performers with restrictive clauses became less common, though it never completely disappeared. Don Reed later reflected, "We weren't trying to change the industry. We were just four friends fighting to keep our music and our dignity. But sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest acts of courage." The Statler brothers continued performing together until their retirement in 2002, maintaining the same lineup for most of their career, a testament to the bond that helped them survive their darkest hour. Their story serves as a reminder that in country music, the most powerful harmony isn't just in the singing, it's in standing together when everything is on the line.